Welcome to the CBER Lunchbox Podcast. Hi, I'm Abbie Chapman, resident craft, animal and animal-themed craft lover of the CBER Lunchbox Podcast team. My job currently involves investigating the trade-offs between the food we eat, where it's grown, and the biodiversity found in the same key spots. But I had a past life as a deep-sea ecologist, studying life without light at the ocean floor. And that's where I met today's guests at the University of Southampton in Dr. Amanda Bates's research group. Today we've got Dr. Rob Cooke and Dr. Conor Waldock, and none of us were doctors back then. Rob is now an ecological modeller at the UK Centre for Ecology and Hydrology, or CEH, and Conor is at ETHZ Zürich, investigating the future of marine ecosystems. Today, thanks to the wonders of the internet, we're going to come together in a virtual room, reunited after about 3 years on the academic circuit as postdocs, which is what they call you when you've finished a PhD, but you're researching without your own lab group yet. So you might also hear us referred to as early career researchers. Hi, Rob. Hi, Conor.
Hi, Abbie.
What have you been up to today?
What did I do this morning? It was another classic day of just fighting fires at the moment. We have some modeling problems and some supercomputer problems. So it's just checking on them, checking the codes running, checking what's going wrong. Yeah, that was my morning.
I love that. So you sound like you work at MI5 now for all our listeners. So Conor, follow that with your I had some coffee and sat with my cat.
Yeah, that is pretty much it. No, I've also been battling with the supercomputer, which is, most of my time at the moment has been looking for the red error messages and then trying to figure out what it was that went wrong.
Yeah, they ever actually tell you what's gone wrong, or do you have to guess?
Only if you write yourself helpful notes to try and identify what it was, but most of the time, no.
Nice. Okay, well, you're probably both wondering why I asked you to come on the CBER Lunchbox podcast. Well, I was quite new to the idea of science when I started a PhD, and I remember you both joining our research group, and it felt like a breath of fresh air, to be honest. You were two silly, fun, and friendly, but very, very clever, actually, and much better at coding than me, as you've already given away, lads joining the group. And as this podcast is all about sharing what working in science is really all about, I thought it might be nice if you could share your stories with our listeners and give your perspectives on what your career's like and how you ended up here. So I hope you don't mind me giving you a little bit of a grilling today. Nervous laughing.
Terrifying.
So Rob, I'll start with you. Do you mind asking, did you always want to work in science, or how did it start for you?
I think when I was a kid, you think about having a career in science, but you don't really think what that means. You just want to be a scientist. I always did all of the science subjects at school because they were what intrigued me the most and what kept me entertained long enough. So I think there was always the idea that I'd end up in science, but then there's the actual realization of that when you go to university and PhD and realize that science is not what you first imagined it would be. It's not loads of experiments and explosions. It's much more data and processing. And I found that bit was actually more interesting for me than traditional science.
I was going to ask, was that disappointment for you, or did it sing to you a little bit more than what you'd expected?
It more surprised me. I was like, oh yeah, I really like just tidying data and making it really neat so that you can do cool patterns and find the answer from the data.
That's really cool. It's nice that I guess if you'd seen a data scientist job advertised when you were younger, maybe it wouldn't have appealed to you, but now that you've tried it, that's your thing.
Yeah, definitely. I wouldn't have said because it's weird in biodiversity science. You're often like a biodiversity accountant, and the idea of becoming an accountant as a child would never have entertained me. But now it's just give me as much data as possible, and I want to see what it says, or I'd still love that link to the actual ecology. When I get data and see the species and I'm like, oh, that one did that, and then that one did this. That's the bit that actually triggers the link to why I'm interested in it still, even though I don't actually see much of the nature in the job. I see it at the weekends and then tie it to the job during the week.
That's really nice. And I guess money type accounting might not have had the same connection for you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And there definitely seems like more motivation for why I'm doing it. I love to see biodiversity and the places around me to be green and full of life. rather than being like, oh, I want to put some more money in people's pockets. So yeah, it seemed like a better motivation to go to work.
What a great motivation that is. Conor,
Yeah,
was your experience similar? Like, did you have family in science careers, or what got you heading in the direction you've headed in? Is it similar to Rob's, different to Rob's?
Yeah, so I never had any family that went to university or worked as scientists at all. And actually, I wasn't really sure of what to do kind of like after college and things. And then I remember, when I was like a really young kid, I went to the zoo. I was also interested in animals, and I used to have a bit of like a menagerie in my bedroom of all different insects and weird creatures, and I can't believe my parents ever put up with it. But I went to the zoo to see the guy from the Really Wild show, Nick Baker. And I remember my mum, like, I was too embarrassed to talk to him. And my mum went up and asked him, like, what did you do at university? Maybe my son could consider it because he's a bit weird like you. And then he was like, oh, I did ecology, but I should have done zoology because that's what I was really interested in. And anyway, I think from that moment on, my mum was like, oh, you should think about doing zoology. So then, I ended up doing that. And actually my aim when I was going to uni, so I was like, oh, this could be a bit of a side project, but I really want to be like a wildlife photographer. And then I realized how kind of expensive photography equipment is. And I was actually much more kind of interested in the scientific process and understanding how we know things. So the whole science path sort of found me, really, I think.
I'm very conscious that people listening at home have heard you both mention supercomputers and modelling, and I'm wondering how you guys ended up modelling. It sounds like animals were the start point for you both. That's something you had in common. That was the biodiversity, the wildlife, the passion there was where it came from. And now you've ended up at a computer. So, I mean, Conor, you first. Like, is that where you thought you would get? How is that still meeting what you wanted to do? How is that in line with what you were hoping for from your career, I guess?
Yeah, I feel like that's my like existential question that I ask myself. Like, do I want to spend all day behind the computer, or do I want to be out doing fun things in nature and collecting my own data? And actually, during my PhD, I didn't collect a lot of data myself, but had the opportunity to go to different places and see other people kind of how they sample the data and use their data. I'm a bit like Rob in the sense that he says it's just like a bit of a nerd for once you start to identify patterns and start to ask different questions within the data set that you're working on. It gives you a lot of freedom to try and think about the systems that you want to think about in a different way. Once you kind of integrate all these different data sources, you can kind of get insights that perhaps other people haven't been able to have because they haven't had access to the same like huge amounts of data that you have.
Do you think it helps you get a bigger picture than if you were standing in a forest or snorkeling in the sea? You might get one vision of an ecosystem, whereas you can test alternatives.
Yeah, and you have this kind of like synthetic view or synthesis over a big overview of everything. Yeah.
Nice. For you, Rob, you sound sold on the modelling, but what can you describe for someone who's not sure what modelling? Maybe they've seen modelling in the context of a weather forecast, or unfortunately more recently in terms of the graphs we get shown quite regularly with the disease and epidemiology side of the pandemic. I mean, what's modelling for you? What are you actually modelling?
Yeah, in mine, it's modeling species and where they are, which is like one of the fundamental questions in ecology. We always try and like just work out where are species and what are they doing. Yeah, I saw someone pose that question on Twitter. Like, if we had perfect data of every species location in the world at a single point, what questions would you then ask? I was like, yeah, I'd never thought that far ahead, because it takes so much effort just to understand what's going on in the world we see. People always underestimate how much modeling they do. You know, like we say we are like modeling because we have a slightly different software that does it, but you do it in like Excel all the time, like to create graphs. Yeah, my partner, when she's like making infographics, I'm like, that's pretty much the same stuff. You know, like you tidy some data, you put it through some summarizing. If you summarize it into like an average, it's still some sort of modeling. And then you look at what comes out and you interpret it. Like, that's all I see it as. And then, with where we found ourselves, it's like bigger data means more complicated modeling, or there's like how the data was collected. So there's biases in the data that you have to correct for. So then you need more complicated modeling, and the data gets bigger, so you need more complicated modeling. So all of that just makes it more difficult to create the models, but it's still kind of, fundamentally, it's still just like a simple linear model normally, some variant of. So I feel like people underestimate how simple modeling is it just gets more computationally complex the bigger you go. And that's the bit I like. I like coding because it's like problem solving. You type in what you want it to do, and if it does it, you should see the right thing that you're expecting. It's kind of like a mini kind of game. Or my nephew does it with, like, you have to program a robot to go like left, then right to end up in the right place. So it's just kind of problem solving and getting to the answer you want. And then the interpretation bit is the most interesting bit, but the modeling is what we spend most of the time doing.
You've summarized that so wonderfully. I think that you're talking about coding, and you've both talked about that. And I think nowadays, particularly, it makes me sound very old, but as a kid, coding wasn't what it was called. You had these sort of robot learning programs at school, but you weren't being told you were coding something. So you've both got coding skills. Like, did you start with those? And also, did you do maths degrees or high level maths to be able to do what you're doing? You were talking about it being quite a simple concept modeling, but all the words you're using to me are shouting maths and complicated IT essentially. I just wondered, like, whether you think it's more accessible than that, or what you think if someone wanted to get into this, what would they need to be trying to build their skills in?
Yeah, I guess if you were an undergraduate student, you could put your skills into learning different programming languages can be really useful. So the dominant one that we use in ecology at the moment is R, but it's just basically a set of instructions for trying to make a computer do something in an automated way. So you have your information on the species and where that species is located, and then you want to be able to kind of manipulate that information and describe it in different ways, and then you can use the different programming languages to do that. But the reason that it's so kind of powerful is because once you have access to doing that for a few species in a programmatic way, you can then expand that into doing it for thousands of species and having like a much more powerful insight if you were to do everything by hand. So
when you're saying you could learn coding, I could cheat here. Like, my brother teaches himself different coding languages from a base, but I wondered, like, Rob, have you always coded? Have you had this mathematical background to start from? How did you get into the modeling side of things?
I didn't really ever have that much of a mathematical background. I did some physics at A level, but it was more on the biology side and the concepts in biology that I was more interested in. I got into coding. I didn't even really get into it in my undergrad. My stats mark was my worst score in my undergrad, so it never really sat with me. But then, in the masters, I got taught coding, and that was where it started like to click. And I much preferred coding to trying to use stats programs, and it all sort of made sense. And my academic crush at the time, Tom Ezard, was like. The way he talked about coding and the way he communicated stats, he just took that like fear factor. Everyone has this like fear of stats and fear of coding, like it's some big terrifying thing, and he just made it really simple, and just it's not that different to other things you've done. And I think with younger generations it's going to be even easier, that they'll all be so competent in technology. I always advise my sister to get my nephews into coding, because I think it will become such a big part of what humans do, because more things can become automated. So it's the people behind them running the automation that will be the ones with the jobs telling computers what to do.
That's a top tip.
It's kind of like a translator from your ideas. It's like the way you get your ideas into actually something useful. You have this thing that you want to understand, so then you can use the computer program to kind of formalize those ideas down on paper. I think that's a nice thing. Yeah, Rob, what you talked about, the fear factor is a big one, I think. And I think it's because we often like compare ourselves to other people. So like when you're comparing yourself to someone else who knows a little bit more about coding, it's like, oh, now it seems terrifying because they're like a genius in my eyes and I'll never be as good as that. I think we need to just like get rid of that concept to, try and learn as much as you can about something. Like at the moment, I'm in a group of a computer scientist, and so I feel like a tiny 4-year-old next to him when we're talking about computer programs and stuff. But yeah, it's good to keep that in mind. I think there's always going to be someone that's kind of better than you at something, so you just have to do the best you can.
Yeah, I remember that when you started doing your Bayesian models in your PhD, and I was like, whoa, okay. And you were like big league, and I was like, yeah, I'm never going to try that. And now we're like, starting to use some Bayesian models in our stuff, and I was like, oh, it's not that different as to what I was doing before, there's some conceptual differences, but it's still the idea of just looking at data and processing it to find out what it's trying to tell you.
It sounds like that fear factor was holding you back there. You were the 4-year-old with Conor back in the day.
Definitely. Yeah.
I'm the 4-year-old now.
Yeah. When you and Tom Bird were like writing out equations, I was like, oh God, I don't want to have to do that. Like that's too much maths for me. Yeah, I much prefer it when the computer does most of the maths and I just do most of the interpreting.
It's nice as well when the computer turns the maths equations and the scary things into words. So a lot of the coding now will, instead of having to have it written in that way you might see in old school maths lessons being scribbled on a chalkboard in a film, you're now actually able to turn it into real words. So the computer would take those instead, so you can sort of speak your own language, which is quite nice. I feel like you both are offering your own version of mentoring advice on this, which is awesome. I actually wanted to ask you, Rob, you already mentioned Tom Ezard for yourself, but I wondered, did you have any sort of mentors that have guided you along the way so far? And did they give you any sort of advice that you particularly remember that you would be happy to share today?
Yeah. Lots of it was about scientific paper writing, which is a weird thing as well, because like even though we're scientists, there's like so many different aspects you have to do. Because you're like almost like a published author. So you're writing like proper full papers on subjects, which is like a very different writing style. And you have to get quite good at writing. I think conveying ideas, it took me a while to get around and like getting my head around what papers were for. And yeah, Tom just basically iterated that papers are a blunt tool. You just got to get your message across. And Amanda was the same. It's like you get one clear message across with 3 sub messages. They basically broke it down into being like, don't try and communicate too much. But I think that communication of science is now growing so much as well, with like how we communicate science, how we make it digestible, and like weird things. Like when you read old papers from like 1974 or something, you see like the way they wrote it was so inaccessible. It was clearly like a gatekeeping way to look at science and be like, we can speak in this language and no one else can understand what we're talking about. This like secures our jobs or our little echo chamber. Whereas I think, I really like the approach that it's moving to. And yeah, lots of my mentors would have advised me like, keep your language simple, convey it to as many people as possible. You want the like most people to read it or the most people to engage with your science. That's how you like now get the most impact out of your science. So I think I've really enjoyed that shift in science recently.
Nice. Yeah, especially if you're writing for like an international audience where like moving abroad and working in an international research group has made me realize that like everyone here is speaking English and writing in English as a second language. So yeah, if your writing's not clear, then you're doing a disservice to your science because people won't be able to understand it as easily as they could. I realized after a long time that I actually wrote backwards, if that makes sense. And I'd always build up a paragraph to then give a conclusion, when in reality I should have given all the information first, a bit more like how a news article is written. And once I realized that, I was like, oh, okay, now actually this is way crisper.
It's what you're taught at school though, isn't it, to build up to that exciting point, or it's what you learn when you watch the telly or whatever, but you've almost got to treat it more like a news article where you're telling people what they need to know in case they've only got 2 seconds and then giving them the more information later. That's a top tip.
I got some good mentoring advice the other day. I was in it's like an online conference for early career researchers, and the guy was like, if you hang out with cool people, you yourself will be cool. And that was he was like, if you hang out with stressed out people all the time who are like, fighting for positions, which, a lot of people are, and a lot of people are stressed, but yeah, then you kind of take on board those stresses. Whereas if you're working with people who are kind of, cool, then you yourself would be cool. I was like, okay, that's great advice. I love it.
Yeah. There's that weird thing about science. It's like, there's so many weirdly competitive aspects, but I feel like so many of them are either ignorable, like you don't need to compete. You hardly ever go for the same job as someone you've like worked with or you like, you could collaborate with. And yeah, so many of like comparing within the same institute, or like not sharing data or lack of openness. It's like the more you share and the more you're open, the more opportunities there are. And there's not like a limited amount of science out there, it's not going to run out. So it always seemed strange, that competitive angle of science.
Yeah, that's reminding me of some good advice that Amanda gave me, actually. She said that ideas are cheap. She was like, ideas are cheap, Conor. The costly thing is to actually implement them and finish them off. So, you should be generous with the ideas. And if you, share them around, if you see someone's done something cool and you could add to it, then it's always good to share your ideas. people often hold things to their chest or want to keep hold of like their pet idea that they think is a moment of genius, but probably it's not, and there's 100 other people thinking of the same thing.
I feel like maybe we've all then had similar top advice, really, that the way to do science and make it a fun career path to be part of, if you like, is to be collaborative, to be open, to be working with other cool people, as you put it, Conor. Like, scientists are really passionate about something usually, and there's never a bad thing to be surrounded by passionate, inspiring people. And I feel like that's probably one of the things I like most about working in science, is that you are surrounded by people who are really trying to think of new things, and you get to have discussions about new ideas, even if you don't have time to do them all, right? And I just wondered, what is it that each of you enjoy most about your job? I mean, you've stayed in science beyond a PhD. That PhD level is more than maybe some people stay in for. So why do you stay? What makes you keep modeling every day?
I think for me, it's just the ability to sort of see through your own curiosity and see a project out is really nice. And you get a lot of kind of, I don't know, ownership of your time and what you choose to spend time on and what you choose to put your attention to in science, I think is probably the best thing. It's really kind of freeing and liberating to have that. So I think that's one of the best things for me.
Yeah, similar. I think the main thing I also enjoy is finding answers. You know, you get answers to questions that just like either come into your head or you've always been wondering. Even like simple stuff, like when I was first compiling trait data, I was like, what's the biggest bird that can fly? And then it's not like there's like facts online, but they're not always right. And then just finding out like answers to weird questions about how the world works, I find really interesting. And then also the other thing I find like motivating is the usefulness of science. Like even obscure science that you don't think sounds useful always turns up on like QI, and it's like actually solved some big issue with something else. Or I like the applied side of ecology, especially, you know, like if we better understand what's going on in the world, we can better manage what's there, how to conserve it and protect it, you know, just live in a nicer world, you know. So I think the usability of science is one of the draws.
I think you've both highlighted really wonderful things, and what I like about it is that they're related to every part of your job. But I am going to ask now about the perhaps more traditionally viewed as cool parts of your job. I wondered if you mind sharing some of your experiences from the sort of trips you've been able to go on, the places you've been able to see, or the things you've been able to learn about through your job, because I guess that's another part of a scientific career that isn't always the best advertised by showing someone in a lab with a test tube, is that actually, particularly as ecologists, you often get to go somewhere, even if it's for a conference rather than a field trip. Like Rob, I believe you grew up in quite a nature-filled area in the UK, but I guess, have you had a particularly fun experience or something that's come to you through science that sort of opened your eyes even more on that?
Yeah, so I have a weird like circular route through where like I started just absolutely loving everything in the UK and just seeing plants and insects and birds and mammals like in Devon growing up and just being like super invested in every species. And then when I realized there's a ton of more species out there, then I did more macroecology and finding out more about the world in general. And then in my master's I got to do some field work, and I feel like most ecologists have had seasons doing field work and understanding where the data comes from. There's just there's more limited opportunities in that. But in Tunisia, it's like doing my first kind of like proper field work with hypothesis testing, and like going out there, I thought I had a clear idea of what I was going to answer and like traditional science question, and then go and get your data and find the answer. And like zero things worked. All my traps were empty. I was trying to trap small mammals, and I had to completely change and do like dung counting over antelopes instead, which is less of the glamorous side of catching cute small mammals. I think it gives you huge opportunities to go and experience the world, and it helps you better understand like there's a ton more ecosystems out there to understand. Like I was looking at how these desert systems, which are so different to where I'd grown up, kind of like species interacted in there, and there's still like some comparisons you can draw, which is also one of the macro advantages. When you start doing things at bigger scales, you can compare more and contrast. But and then I ended up back in the UK with much more focus on UK insects and UK species again. And I remember Soren in Gothenburg, my previous boss, saying that the UK basically doesn't have any biodiversity. And to start with, I was like, that does seem like there's like the idea that we should just go and protect everything in the tropics because that's where all the biodiversity is. But then I kind of changed my thought on that and thought, how can we get more biodiversity where people live? Because there's going to be people living on Earth and the population keeps increasing. So how can we integrate biodiversity with humans? And I find that aspect much more interesting again. So it kind of led back in a circle back to looking at the UK and how we manage biodiversity and understanding biodiversity and its interaction with humans.
That's awesome. So you're aware now that the desert isn't barren, and then you've gone out and explored, and it's brought you back to the UK with, I guess, a really nice perspective on maybe the UK isn't barren either, and maybe I can be the one that focuses on the home ground. It's perhaps a little bit less exotic, but just as fascinating, right?
So what I'm taking away from Rob's story is he went away to explore somewhere where there was going to be some wonderful diversity, and he actually found poo. And so then he came back to the UK where it was really at all along.
Yeah, pretty much.
And yeah, I swear when I ask you this, you're mocking him, Conor, but I swear when I ask you this question, you're going to refer to, you've been to some really cool places, traditionally cool places. To people from the UK, if you're a UK listener, you want to be visiting the tropics that Rob's saying is not where it's at. And I feel like Conor, you did that quite nicely during your PhD. But where's been your favourite?
I think what you're saying before, your question about like science and why it's cool in the traditional approaches is like, you never know where these opportunities are going to come from to do kind of cool work. Like, yeah, as you say, like I went to Tasmania during my PhD for a work stint there. But when I started my PhD, it was never really an intention to go there. I wasn't even aware that our supervisor was working with people out there. And then the opportunity came that I could go and stay for 3 months, and then ended up doing some really cool dives out there and seeing lots of interesting species. And yeah, I think that's one of the best things about science is that you get to, these opportunities come out of nowhere, and then you're like, yeah, you have to be open to taking them, I think. But yeah, like for example, starting here in ETH, I didn't realize that they were actually involved in a lot of work in the tropics. And then one of the PhD students was starting a project in Curacao in the Caribbean. And because I have my diving qualification, which also kind of came up randomly during my PhD that I should get that, and got to go out on this trip with them. And we were sampling different reef fish species and taking little fin clips so they could do genetic work on them. And that kind of opportunity came out of nowhere as well. So yeah, it's really cool.
That's also got a really nice side to it, Conor, because I think when I ended up venturing into the marine realm, as it were, you were surrounded by people who had known they wanted to get into marine ecology from much younger than I had. I didn't really know that people studied it in science. And they were all ones that had been scuba diving since they were really young. And I guess what's really nice there is you've just highlighted that actually it's never too late. Like you've taken on that challenge during your PhD, got your diving qualifications and been able to have these awesome experiences. It's not like you needed to tee that up before you could start your career in science, which is really nice.
Yeah, as long as you're open to the opportunities,
yeah, yourself being open is important, not necessarily assume and don't assume that the science world is closed to you, which I think many people perhaps do when they see these people that already have all these sort of quite specialist qualifications. They might think, oh, that I can't do that actually, but I think what we're finding today is that you can get those opportunities later too, and they'll still be open to you, which is really nice.
Yeah, I feel like you had to put in some hard yards as well with some cold water dives in the UK first before you went out to Tasmania. And then I was like, yeah, not so keen.
Yeah, so when I went out to Tasmania, I was thinking it was going to be warm water dives as well, but actually it's pretty temperate there and cold also. Really? Yeah, but finally here I got to go to the tropics and experience some nice warm water. So yeah, that was nice.
That's much better. Unlike Rob, you're probably not going to now prefer diving in the UK.
No, I think the UK's got a lot of nice diving. It's just a lot of the training is in quarries, so
Very
you're
cold.
it's pretty cold and dark, and not much exciting fish to be seen.
Cool cuttlefish though.
Yeah, that's true.
I guess that gets us on quite nicely to ask you a more difficult question, which is, what's been the most challenging thing that you've had to face, do you think, to get to where you are now?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge probably in being in science, or in my experience of science so far, is there's a lot of uncertainty. As well as there's a lot of opportunities that kind of come around quite randomly, there's also a lot of uncertainty that can kind of crop up, and there's a lot of short-term contracts. And yeah, that can be a major challenge and take a lot of kind of resilience and hopefulness that things will kind of work out and the jobs will come up in the end. And you also have to be quite proactive in looking for jobs and trying to search for your own money, which takes a lot of time in your evenings and things. So it's not like a more traditional career where you get a permanent job and you're set for the foreseeable future. It can be you're set for 2 years or so, and then you next have to think about the next position while you're currently doing your work and trying to make your science. So that's a major challenge.
I guess that seems fair given the enjoyment you seem to get out of your job. I guess that's
I think that's
right.
Yeah, I think that is why the system exists as it does, because you're sort of willing to suffer those uncertainties because you're kind of happy in your job and happy in your role. Yeah.
Another one I was thinking of is the kind of scientific cliques that being ECRs. I mean, some people would now see us as like much more established when we've now got postdocs, etc. But being like PhDs, trying to like access scientific cliques or collaborate with people outside of like who directly collaborated with your supervisor seemed like almost impossible. And now they just sort of like more organically happen and more opportunities come up, as Conor says. But opportunities to actually interact with other scientists, I think still has some way to go in like how people approach. I've had some amazing ones where people like approach you and would say, do you want to work on this or do this, or I think this could be interesting to work on together. But I still don't feel like brave enough or established enough to go and approach people and be like, oh, I think we could work on this paper together. And I think that kind of like clique mentality is quite difficult. I don't even know if it exists up there, but it's that kind of fear of the upper bits of academia is quite challenging.
Do you think it's a fear you fear not fitting in with that? Do you think that's, I was going to ask you, and I think this fits in quite nicely. It seems like you've still got a little confidence building to do, which is obviously to be expected. You're still early in your career. I'm talking about your career, and you're still very early into it, which is fantastic and exciting. But I guess the downside of that is you've still got some confidence building to do. But if you were to talk to younger Rob right now, are there tips you would give, or a younger listener thinking, I don't even know, do you have any things that you've learned along the way that you think actually would give you some reassurance?
Yeah, I think that people are much more open to collaborations than I thought they would be, and much happier. You don't have to have like a big name. I thought they're not going to know who I am or what I've done, or like why would they bother? Is what I used to think about starting up collaborations, and now I think like if they don't want to, they don't have to. Like just give them the option. Approach people and say, it might be cool if we worked on this together. And as Conor says as well, like ideas are cheap. You can approach someone and it come to nothing, and it doesn't often waste that much of your time, or like it's not unproductive. You now know more than you did before. So I feel like just take more shots and just open up yourself to collaborations and say, I've always wanted to do that with this person, just try it and see.
I think that's such a top tip. I think as well, like there's often this fear, I think, that can be in some people, particularly if you're someone who didn't always know if they wanted to be in a particular type of science or in academia particularly. You might have this fear of not being a big name or something, and actually you're right, you've got if you treat it as having nothing to lose, because people aren't horrible in this world, most of them aren't, as far as we've experienced so far. I hope it's a we've experienced so far. So you're always going to learn something from that interaction, even if it's just learning about what they are interested in, even if it wasn't quite the thing that you were proposing. That's top advice. How about you, Conor? What would you advise young Conor?
Yeah,
not that you're not young now, but
still young, holding on to it.
Young at heart.
Not even. I think that's a really good one. Like reaching out to people is like so important. It's like scary. I even get scared of doing it now. Like I'm trying to write some like grants to do my own research, and even now I'm putting off for like a week writing an email to someone just to be like, hey, I've got this idea and I'd like to work with you, like what do you think? It's like it's always a barrier there, but I think it really pays off in the end, because like for example, when I was doing my undergrad, I ended up in my department sending an email to most of the people that I thought did interesting research, seeing if they wanted, to hire someone for the summer, or if I could help out in the lab, just to get experience. And I just wanted to see what it was like. And I think that really got the ball rolling for me, because then once people see that you're motivated and you're really keen and you're, giving up your own time to do something, then they kind of invest back in you. So I think that's a huge one. If you're, first year undergrad or something, just reaching out to people if you can to, see if you could do some work for them, or if they have any work available.
That's a really good idea, because some people can be put off that, but actually a little passion can go a long way. You only need to get yourself in front of someone for them to realise what your work ethic's like, how interested you are. And sometimes people just really are keen to find someone else who's interested in that thing they really, really love. I mean, who would have thought we'd be gathering and getting so excited about supercomputers and coding and data? When I think we all started from a place of just really liking animals and being really fascinated by them. It's a bit mad when you think about it, but you've got that shared inner passion, haven't you? I think that's really powerful.
Yeah. And people aren't like necessarily going to take notice of you, so you have to reach out to them. Like if you do nothing, then nothing's going to happen in the end. So yeah.
But nothing to lose putting yourself out there.
No, you have nothing to lose at all.
Knowing what you know now, if someone was starting out and you know about the uncertainty and the challenges you described, as well as the opportunities, if someone wasn't sure, would you tell them to give it a go? And if so, where should they start?
I would 100% tell people to give it a go. I'm trying to think where they would start. It depends on where you're at, really. But I would start by just like thinking about where you want to be in 5 years' time and what you want to be doing, and then figuring out how you do that and who you need to talk to and what qualifications you need. Like, just be really pragmatic about it. That's my advice. It's not very fun, but
nice top advice. And at least then if what you're doing now doesn't align so well with that, if you are later in your career, then that's a really valuable question to have asked yourself, because you might decide that you want to retrain or change, or just reach out to those people and say, look, I've got a different skill set, but actually would you consider me coming to work with you, because I could be really valuable because I have this passion in X or Y. That's really cool.
One thing I also think is so you like see loads on Twitter about academia and the positives and negatives, but I always think like it's weird at some point, like in our careers, you shift from like at school you always think about science like in the broad sense, and then at some point you start talking about academia. But yeah, is to keep in mind that like science is so much bigger than academia. You know, there's like, if you don't like parts of academia, you can still do science. It doesn't mean you can't do science. And yeah, science is so diverse. Like there's a ton of jobs out there that are completely different to the ones me and Conor do, and they're still really useful. Like, yeah, I don't know now. Some people would say I'm in academia at CEH, and some people would say I'm not. And it kind of doesn't matter, you know, like science is bigger than that. You can do science in so many different ways. You can do science communication, scientific illustration, you know, there's like a ton of careers in science. And I think it's, not losing perspective that you have to be this like academic professor. That's what a scientist is. I feel like that really narrows down, and you hear much more conversation about academia and universities and what it's like, but you hear less conversations about how big science is. You know, like science is like one of the biggest industries in the UK and one of the biggest employers, because there's so many different types of jobs in it. So yeah, I feel
that's
like
a fantastic thing to raise, Rob, because I think we're talking obviously to you guys, you're at universities now, but you'd be hugely employable in many other industries, and you could leave, come back, change, go for many other jobs and roles. I mean, you've described what you do, and it can be applied in other places. So that's a really good point, because I guess you're not trapping yourself if you decide you want to head towards a career in science more generally. That's not trapping you to be at a university forever. It's a really good point. And gives us definitely some more fuel for podcasts. We'll be reaching out to the scientists working in jobs that are definitely outside of the academic realm as well. It's a really good point.
Yeah, that'd be really interesting.
So I'm going to wrap us up, and thank you so much, both of you, for your time today. If you don't mind, I'd usually start with these, but I thought you're both quite competitive. So I sort of wanted to morph this into a speedy competition at the end instead. So I'm going to ask you a question, and I'd like you to say the first thing that comes to your head as soon as it does, as quickly as you can. Are you ready?
Am I going to scare my cat?
Don't scare your cat. You don't need to shout. It's all right. We'll hear you. Maybe we won't. Maybe you will scare your cat. Okay. Favourite animal?
Honey badger.
Honey badger or what?
I said giraffe, but it's actually the first animal that just came to my head. Just get ahead.
I feel like that's a point to Rob then.
Just
I'll keep hands for a different one. Favourite insect?
Dragonfly.
Stick insect and dragonfly. I'm going to give it to the stick insect because I think it's cooler. Favourite plant?
Ginkgo.
Oh!
Orchid.
Sorry, that was a win because it was a cool tree and first.
Yeah,
sorry,
it was
Will.
much quicker. I've
Favourite
got all
place?
Home.
Oh, that's cheating, Conor, but I like it. Scotland. All right, I'll give it to Scotland. Favourite scientific conference?
BES, macroecology.
Oh,
yeah,
nice. Good effort, both of you.
That's a win for macro, isn't it?
Yeah, that's the British Ecological Society Macroecology, i.e. large-scale ecology conference. For anyone listening that wants to look into that and go along, and it's in the summer every year, so it's a lovely time. Favourite GG plot colour scheme?
No, I was going to say Calibrea, but it's not my favourite. It's just the first I thought of.
There's one that came out that's about fish that I quite like. It's called Fishy-Lies.
Of course there is.
Point to Fishy-Lies because, come on, that's awesome. Favourite thing about your job?
I can work in my pyjamas.
Nice. Go on, Rob.
Yeah, well, it's too diffuse. I can't think.
You'll leave it open, will you? You'll let Conor win.
There's kestrels nesting in CEH at the moment. They're quite cool.
That is awesome.
Oh, that's good.
It's true, actually. CEH have an Instagram that people can follow if they're interested in finding out more. People have to look out for that. I'll stop grilling you now. Conor, you officially won. There's no prize, but you just know in your heart that you were the winner of the CBER Lunchbox Podcast quiz that we just made up today. So yeah, thank you both so much for today. Maybe we'll check in with each other in another 3 years and see where we got to, see if we're still loving science and what our top tips to selves would be. But that's it for today. So thank you very much. I'll say goodbye.
Cool. Thanks very much, Abbie.
Thanks, Abbie.
That was the CBER Lunchbox podcast with me, Abbie Chapman, interviewing Rob Cooke and Conor Waldock. If you enjoyed that, please do check out the CBER website where you'll find more of our podcasts with all sorts of wonderful scientists telling us all about how they got into science, what inspires them, and what they hope and plan for the future. Thanks very much for listening. Take care. Bye. That was the CBER Lunchbox podcast with me, Abbie Chapman, interviewing Rob Cooke and Conor Waldock. If you enjoyed that, please do check out the CBER website where you'll find more of our podcasts with all sorts of wonderful scientists telling us all about how they got into science, what inspires them, and what they hope and plan for the future. Thanks very much for listening. Take care. Bye.